All right, everyone. Now for another post about breath by James Nestor. In this video, I want to address an excellent comment made the other day under my first video on this subject by Master Mike. First, I'm going to read out the whole comment since it's every word of it is really excellent and important, and then I will share my thoughts on that comment. Master Mike: why aren't you talking about the highlight of the Rogan interview and a major section in the book being Nestor's recommendation of homeoblock, which is essentially the same exact thing as DNA appliance and similar to AGA? If you're recommending the book, don't you think you should address the recommendations of those devices within and reiterate you believe them to all be complete snake oil scams that do not change the bone the way they advertise and instead only push on your teeth in an unhealthy way? And since those devices are discussed as a major solution to breathing problems, not only in the interview, but in the book as well, how do you separate the quality information surrounding the importance of breathing Nestor addresses with the blatant lies of charlatans selling you an expander that ruins your teeth? I always find it difficult when I hear someone with good ideas on an important subject, especially when it comes to the medical field, then include some kind of unsupported homeopathic claims, in this case homeoblock or DNA device. It is difficult for me to not then look at that person and go, well, if they're ignorant enough to fall for this and write a book that has a section supporting it, and they discuss it in an interview with millions of viewers without even taking the time to simply look up all the criticisms available about how these appliances, devices are essentially just massive marketing machines that use nonsensical language to trick desperate people into shoving cheap plastic devices in their mouths that end up pushing all their teeth while doing nothing to expand the palate or grow bone. Ouch. Not to mention the fact that DNA, homeoblock, AGA are all priced extremely high, $8,000 to $20,000 each, for something that costs less than $100 to make and requires limited involvement from the provider. If Nestor can fall for that and shout support for it from the rooftops, then how can I believe anything else he is saying or trust his judgment on the rest of his book, regardless of the fact that what he's discussing is important and it does include quality information like the Wim Hof methods? Okay, now let me address Master Mike's excellent comment. Master Mike, I agree with you. I agree with you that James Nestor gets it really wrong when it comes to proposing a solution to the problem of underdeveloped faces. I do not think that metal wrapped in plastic pushing on the teeth and on the bones surrounding the teeth, such as this expander I have here in my hand. It has little jack screws. You turn it and then the plastic pushes into the teeth and into the gums around the teeth. I do not think that that is the solution to the problem James Nestor has described. I think bad things happen when you push on the teeth, and I think there are better solutions out there, namely the MSE. I mean, James Nestor talks about, in the first chapter, he gets into how the underdevelopment of faces specifically causes the nasal cavity to be small, which causes mouth breathing. He specifically mentions the importance of the nasal cavity when it comes to the breath, and yet he neglects the MSE appliance, when the MSE appliance is the appliance that's actually going to go into the roof of your mouth and split that suture to make your nasal cavity bigger, directly addressing the problem that he is describing. So I think that anyone who's watched my content knows that I advocate the MSE over any tooth-borne appliance. And I agree with you 100% that these appliances are wrapped in a lot of scandalous misinformation, and that people are being duped into thinking that these appliances are growth appliances, when in fact all they are push-on-the-teeth appliances. I do acknowledge that with something like the DNA or even an expander like this, if it's done in a skillful way and it's pushing on the upper molars and on the area around the upper molars, that is putting some stress on the mid-palatal suture. And it might trigger some amount of bone deposition in response to the stress on the palate itself that's coming from this appliance. But I would say that mostly what is happening, or predominantly what is happening, is that the teeth are being stressed. So no, I in no way advocate these appliances. And I do advocate the MSE as a much better solution to the problem James Nestor has described. And it's crazy because he actually talked to Mariana Evans, and I'm sure she plugged the MSE, since she is one of the world's foremost providers of the MSE. So I actually haven't gotten to that part of the book, or even to, I haven't gotten to the part where he discusses solutions to the problem, so I don't know how strongly he advocates these acrylic expanders. But my sense was that in the Rogan interview, he was actually kind of lukewarm about the HomeoBlock. He was talking about it sort of as if it were an ongoing experiment for him, although he did come out and say that he got several pennies worth of bone mass that he achieved from that appliance, and so it sounds like he was at least somewhat sold on it. Now, to your other point, that because Nestor screws up the solution to the problem, that we should completely dismiss everything else he says. No, I disagree with that. I disagree with that. I think that there's a lot of value in this book, and that it takes mainstream essentially what the Muse have been saying all along. The Muse have really made their fame, their well-deserved fame, on the description of the problem. And of course, on solving the problem for children. But for us adults, they've nailed the diagnosis of the facial underdevelopment epidemic. James Nestor has taken what the Muse have done, and he is taking it mainstream, and there's a lot of value to that. I don't agree with throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think that with any work, you can treat it like a thief. Take what you want and leave the rest, and acknowledge that just because one part of it is imperfect, it doesn't mean that the whole thing is trash. I've even said the AGA providers, even though I consider AGA to be the most dangerous dental scam in existence right now, I still say that the AGA providers do a really good job of acknowledging when someone has an obstructed airway, whereas most dentists won't even acknowledge that someone's mouth is too small to begin with. So you can have someone who gets something right, but the other part be wrong, and there still be value in the part that they're getting correctly. So I think the value here is essentially taking the diagnostic work of the Muse and making it mainstream. And there's some other cool stuff right off the bat that James Nestor is getting correct. Like in chapter 1, he talks about this experiment that he's about to do on himself, where he's going to plug his nose for 10 days and exclusively mouth breathe for 10 days and test to see what impact that has on his health. I think that's a really interesting experiment. If James Nestor in this book can provide real scientific evidence for why nasal breathing is good and mouth breathing is bad, then that is a worthwhile contribution. In sum, Master Mike, I agree with you that James Nestor screws the pooch when it comes to proposing a solution to this problem. But I disagree with you that his wrongness on that issue renders this whole book useless. I completely disagree with that. I think that it is absolutely a worthwhile read for most people, and that we can forgive him for getting the solution wrong, because it's really hard to find the right solution to this problem. I mean, look at me. Look at me. For the first several years, I got it wrong. it's hard to get it right. I mean, you're taking advice from these dentists and they're telling you one thing, and it's hard for you to parse out the good information from the bad information. The only way I was able to do it was through my own experience. And honestly, if it weren't for my content and maybe a handful of others, how would anyone know how dangerous the AGA is? Unless you were involved in these obscure Facebook groups, you would have no idea the danger of these appliances, because you have these dental authorities hammering into your brain that it's safe and that it's a growth appliance and that it's this and it's that. These people are thought leaders. These people are in a position of authority. They're telling you that these appliances work in a certain way. And the only way you can know that it's bullshit is to either go through it yourself and suffer, or to be exposed to the content of someone else who's gone through the experience and suffered. So I can't knock Nestor for making the same mistake I did, because I know how easy it is to get wrapped up in the misinformation around these appliances. So thankfully, people reading Nestor's book, maybe if they do a little bit more research, they might come across a content like mine and then read a comment like yours, Master Mike, and they might spare themselves the suffering of going through at best, partially effective appliance, and at worst, a damn dangerous appliance to address their facial underdevelopment issues. And if they're lucky, they will immediately come across MSE positive content and spare themselves the suffering of going through going down a false path with these acrylic expanders, or even worse, something like AGA, which doesn't put any stress on the mid-palatal suture, triggering at least the potential for some small amount of bone growth. Instead, it just pushes on the front teeth and rams them right through the bone and destroys mouths and causes a tremendous amount of suffering. End of rant for now, and I will catch up with y'all again on this subject soon. Peace out.